Marnie Oduya had worked the evening shift at the Riverside Community Diner for 6 years. Long enough to know the rhythm of a Tuesday night down to the minute. The retirees who came in at 5. The exhausted nurses from St. Luke's who came in at 7 still wearing their scrubs. And the quiet after 9 when the place emptied out and the only sound left was the hum of the milkshake machine. She noticed the boy the moment he sat down, because children did not usually come in alone, and this one had. He looked about 7, maybe 8, wearing a jacket a size too big for him. The kind of jacket that gets handed down or bought big on purpose so it lasts another winter. He climbed into a booth by the window, folded his hands on the table the way children do when they've been taught manners by someone patient, and waited. Marnie walked over with a menu. "Hi there. Just you tonight, bud?" "My dad's parking the car," the boy said. "He'll be right in." She left the menu and went to check on her other tables, and when she circled back 10 minutes later, the boy was still alone, still sitting with his hands folded, still watching the door. "Everything okay, sweetheart? You want to order something while you wait?" The boy shook his head. "I'm not hungry." Marnie had waited tables long enough to know the difference between a kid who wasn't hungry and a kid who was hungry but had decided not to be. And something about the second kind always sat wrong with her. She crouched down next to the booth so she was closer to his eye level. The way you do with kids when you want them to know you're actually listening. "You sure? We've got the good mac and cheese tonight." That was when the boy said it. Quiet, almost to himself, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to say it out loud. "I won't eat until Mom comes home." Marnie felt something shift in her chest, the specific unease of an adult realizing a child has said something they weren't supposed to say, or something that meant more than the words themselves. "Where's your mom, honey?" The boy didn't answer. He looked back toward the window, toward the parking lot, toward a car that, as far as Marnie could tell, wasn't there. It was at that exact moment that a man rose from a booth near the back of the diner, a man Marnie hadn't paid much attention to, a regular of sorts, the kind of customer who came in a few nights a week, ordered black coffee, and worked quietly on a laptop until closing. His name was Walter Grady, 63 years old, a retired detective who had put in 28 years with the county sheriff's department before hanging it up 4 years earlier, and who had, in that time, developed the kind of instincts that don't retire even when the badge does. Walter froze, not because the sentence was strange, because he had heard a version of that exact sentence before, 11 years earlier, from a different child, in a different diner, under circumstances that had ended very badly for everyone involved except, thankfully, the child. He set his coffee down and walked toward the booth, slow, unthreatening, the careful walk of a man who has learned that scaring a frightened child is the fastest way to lose whatever information they're sitting on. "Hey there," Walter said, crouching down beside Marnie. "I'm Walter." "What's your name?" "Dominic," the boy said. "That's a good name. Dominic, can I ask you something? When's the last time you saw your mom?" Dominic's chin trembled just slightly, the way a child's does right before they decide whether to hold it together or not. "This morning. She said she'd be back before dinner. She's always back before dinner." "And your dad? Is he really parking the car?" Dominic looked down at his folded hands. He said not to tell people things. Walter had spent nearly 3 decades learning to read the small, involuntary tells that separate an anxious child from a rehearsed one, and Dominic was giving him every sign of the second kind, the too careful phrasing, the glance toward the door before every answer, the refusal to eat that had nothing to do with appetite and everything to do with some private rule he'd been given and was terrified of breaking. Marnie, watching this unfold, felt her pulse pick up in the specific way it does when an ordinary evening quietly stops being ordinary. Walter asked, gently, "Dominic, is your dad here right now?" The boy shook his head, and then, in a whisper so quiet Marnie almost missed it, he said, "He's not really my dad. The diner, which moments earlier had felt like the safest, most boring place in the world, suddenly felt very different. Walter did not raise his voice. He did not reach for his phone in a way that would alarm the boy. He simply asked Marnie, calmly, to bring Dominic a hot chocolate and keep him company for a few minutes, and then he stepped just far enough away to make a call. Not to 911 immediately, but to a former colleague still on the force, a detective named Priya Chandrasekaran, who Walter trusted more than almost anyone still wearing a badge. He gave her the details in the clipped, precise language of a man who had once written 1,000 incident reports. A boy, approximately 8, named Dominic, brought into a diner by an unrelated male. Left alone with instructions not to talk, expressing fear his actual mother was missing. It took 11 minutes for the first patrol car to arrive, and in those 11 minutes, Walter sat across from Dominic and did the only thing his instincts told him mattered more than questions. He made the boy feel safe enough to keep talking without being pushed. Dominic said his mother's name was Elena. He said she worked at a hair salon on Delacroix Street. He said the man who brought him, a man Dominic called Ray, had picked him up from school 3 days ago and told him his mom had gone on a trip, and that if anyone asked, he was supposed to say Ray was his dad. He said Ray had left him in the diner just for a few minutes, which had now stretched into nearly 40. When Officer Chandrasekaran arrived, she recognized the name Elena Vasquez almost immediately. A missing persons report had been filed 2 days earlier by Elena's sister, who said Elena had failed to pick up her son from school and hadn't answered a single call since. What no one had known, until that moment in the diner, was that the son in question hadn't vanished alongside her. He'd been placed, deliberately, somewhere he'd eventually be found, by a man who, investigators would later determine, had panicked once he realized how much attention Elena's disappearance was drawing and had decided a child in tow made him far too visible to keep hiding. Ray never returned to the diner. Patrol units picked him up 2 hours later at a motel 11 miles away, and it was there, in a search of that room, that they found the first real evidence connecting him to Elena's disappearance. Evidence that would matter a great deal in the weeks of investigation that followed, though it would take 3 more days of searching before Elena herself was found, alive, in circumstances that made it clear just how much worse this story could have ended if a 7-year-old boy hadn't decided that not eating was the only form of protest he had left. Dominic stayed with Marnie and Walter at the diner until his aunt arrived to collect him, and in that time, he ate exactly one thing, a small bowl of the mac and cheese Marnie had mentioned earlier, which he accepted only after Walter told him, quietly, that his mother would want him to eat. That waiting hungry wasn't the same as waiting loyal. Elena was reunited with her son 4 days later, thinner, shaken, but alive, and the first thing Dominic reportedly said to her, according to the aunt who witnessed it, was not a question about what had happened, but a simple accounting, "I didn't eat until you came back. I promised." Walter Grady still comes into the Riverside Diner a few nights a week. He still orders black coffee. But Marnie says he watches the door differently now, the way a man does once he's learned, all over again, that the most important thing anyone ever tells you in a diner rarely sounds important at all, until you stop and actually listen to it.